We are now going to examine the situation of international trade where the two countries are now able to trade with each other. And we would like to characterize the new equilibrium. We'd like to know what each country is exporting, what each country is importing. We'd like to have some idea about what the rate of exchange of goods is between the two countries. And we'd like to know if each country is better off or not. So let's suppose the two countries do trade with each other. And one thing we know is that the trade price, the ratio of exchange between wheat and cloth, has to be in between the slopes of the two production functions. And we'll assume for purposes of illustration that the two countries negotiate and that they agree on a free trade price of 2/3, which means that in equilibrium, PW over PC is 2/3. And that, when represented by a slope, lies in between the slope of the domestic country's production possibility frontier and the foreign country's production possibility frontier. And it has to be that way, because if the terms of trade, which is the PW divided by PC, if the terms of trade was not in that range, then one country would actually be effectively trading at a worse sort of deal than it could do if it stayed on its own production possibility frontier. So if we represent that slope by PW over PC, what does that actually mean in terms of exchanging one good for the next, for the other one? Well, PW is dollars over wheat, and PC is dollars over cloth. So if you put the dollars over wheat and divide it by dollars over cloth, what happens effectively is the dollar term cancels out, and what you're left with is units of the physical good cloth divided by units of the physical good wheat. So that's sort of like the international relative price of wheat in terms of units of cloth. The dollars cancel out. They don't actually make any difference to the result, so don't worry about the dollar thing. It's actually a situation where one country is trading physical units of one good in exchange for physical goods of another, of the other country. The 2/3 ratio is the terms of trade. It's the rate at which one country is doing a deal with the other country. And on my page 18 of my notes, you'll see I call that also the trade price. And I write there in my notes on page 18, the trade price has to be in between the two slopes that the two countries have when they're in autarky being non-trading. So we're assuming the 2/3 ratio just to make the understanding clearer. And the 2/3 choice is somewhat arbitrary. So as long as the ratio of trade is in between the slopes of the two countries' PPFs, really the logic is the same. So to keep it simple, we'll pick a plausible number, 2/3, which means the home country sends the foreign country 1 unit of wheat, and in return it receives 2/3 of a unit of cloth. Now, if you want to make the model a little bit real, this 2/3 ratio in the real world would actually be determined by bargaining between the two countries. So if one country has a better bargaining position than the other, it could get that ratio more in its advantage. So that's the number we'll use to explain how both countries gain from trade. So there's a concept called the world price line that I'm really not going to address because it's not shown in my notes actually. So let me move on. We're going to take each country in turn, and we're going to look at how it can become better off from trade with the other country, and we're going to assume this 2/3 rate of exchange. The only condition for both countries to be better off is that the terms of trade slope should lie in between the two production possibility frontier slopes. And the division of gains is affected by exactly what the terms of trade ratio will be. So at this point, we've reached page 20 in the PDF notes, and we're going to do a simplifying assumption here. We're going to assume that each country specializes completely in one of the goods. Now, in a more complicated model, we wouldn't have to assume that, but we're just trying to illustrate some principles here. So let's keep life simple. Each country is going to specialize completely in producing only one of the two goods. So if we open to trade, what the home country is going to do is, firstly, it's going to produce the full amount of wheat that it can. It's going to completely specialize in wheat. That was our assumption. So the home country is going to produce 100 units of wheat. That's the home country using all of its labor force solely to produce wheat. So now it has 100 units of wheat. 40 units of wheat the home country keeps for itself, for its own consumption. The remaining 60 bushels of wheat the home country exports to the foreign country. And when the home country exports those 60 bushels of wheat to the foreign country, it exchanges those 60 bushels for cloth. And the rate of exchange of wheat for cloth is given by the pink line. So the home country starts out producing 100 units of wheat. Then what you can imagine is that the first 60 units, the distance between 40 and 100 on the horizontal axis, 60 units are given over to the other country. 40 units remain with the home country. So the home country sells 60 units of wheat, and it does that at the slope we talked about, the -2/3. It's negative because of the direction of the slope. The -2/3 terms of trade, and you can see that allows the home country to move up the purple line where it touches indifference curve U2 at C. So at C, the home country is at C because it's produced 40 units of wheat for itself. So that determines the horizontal value, the horizontal coordinate. And 60 units of wheat have been traded, sold to the foreign country at the 2/3 terms of trade. And that's what moves the home country up the cloth axis to a value of 40. So the home country is at C, which is a better position than being at A in autarky. So as you would guess, the foreign country does everything in the reverse direction. So the foreign country specializes completely in producing cloth. It keeps some of that cloth for itself. The rest of that leftover cloth is sold to the home country. By selling to the home country, the foreign country is able to move down that sort of purple-pink kind of line, but they're going in the opposite direction from the home country. So the foreign country is able to reach point C. At point C, the foreign country is producing 60 yards of cloth and importing 60 bushels of wheat. So that's how the foreign country reaches that C star point, which is on a higher and superior indifference curve U2 asterisk. Now, by the way, here's a terminology thing. In trade theory, when we are dealing with the home country, we just use the C or the U or the A. When we have a foreign country as the other entity, we represent its variables by adding an asterisk. So if you look carefully, really carefully, you can see next to the B for the foreign country, there's B with a little asterisk actually, and a C with an asterisk, and an A with an asterisk. The U2 asterisk, everything there with an asterisk is the foreign country's slope line, indifference curve, or whatever. So that helps us keep straight, especially if we put all these lines on the same diagram, home and foreign together. You really need the asterisk to know which one applies to the foreign country and which one applies to the home country. So once again, here you can see the foreign country also can become better off in trade, and it specializes 100% in producing cloth, and some of that cloth it exports, some of the cloth it keeps for itself, and the cloth that gets exported brings in the wheat, and given the shapes of things, that allows it to be better off. The foreign country is better off specializing completely in cloth. So getting to the conclusions, each country will export the good for which it has a comparative advantage. That is to say, it is in the interest for each country to export the good when it has the comparative advantage in that good. That's the first lesson of the Ricardian model. Second lesson is that there are gains from trade for both countries. It isn't zero sum. So that's important. Now, the very last slide is addressing the issue of wages and are the workers better off or not. And you can show that in this model, in this solution, the workers receive a higher wage rate for the work they do. And essentially they're receiving a higher wage rate because now the workers in each country are specializing in producing the good at which they are most productive, where they have the highest marginal productivity. And that's possible, and that's the situation because both countries are completely specializing in producing one good. Now, the bottom part of page 24 in the notes is confusing, but it's trying to make the point that workers in the home country and foreign country are better off because they're specializing in producing only the good at which they are more efficient. That manifests in terms of higher real wages. And all of this works because we assume theoretically a constant marginal productivity of labor. So that's the end of our Ricardian model study. Here are some key terms that came up in the Ricardian model. And terms of trade, marginal product of labor, the pattern of trade, opportunity cost indifference curves, all those things we will be using in the next model, the Heckscher-Ohlin model.